The Pharaoh of Egypt was a mighty king, yet he feared the Hebrews, for they grew ever in strength and numbers, and might one day unite with his enemies to overthrow him. So the Pharaoh ordered that the Hebrews be enslaved, and that every Hebrew baby boy be drowned in the Nile. One Hebrew mother hid her young son. Terrified that he would be found by the Pharaoh's soldiers, she placed him in a papyrus basket and cast him out onto the Nile, not knowing where the river might take him. Now it came to pass that the Pharaoh's daughter was bathing in the Nile. She saw the baby and grasped the basket before it floated by. Taking pity on the child, she adopted him as her own son, calling him Moses. And so it was that a Hebrew boy was raised in the palace of his enemies. Moses grew into a fine young man. Then one day he saw an Egyptian master beating a Hebrew slave. Enraged, Moses struck the slave master and killed him. Knowing that the Pharaoh would surely put him to death, he fled Egypt. Far from the Pharaoh, Moses lived as a shepherd. While tending his sheep, God appeared to him as a burning bush. The Lord spoke to him, commanding him to return to Egypt and free his people. Moses traveled to Egypt to speak with the Pharaoh, but the old man had died, and his son now ruled the country. Moses stood before the new ruler and told him that God wanted the Hebrews to be freed. The Pharaoh would not believe him and wanted a sign. So the young man threw down his staff, and God turned it into a snake. Yet the Egyptian thought it was a trick and would not free his slaves. Therefore the Lord sent 10 plagues to punish the Pharaoh. Firstly, he turned the river Nile into blood, so that all the fish died, and there was no water to drink. Then God sent plagues of frogs, mosquitoes, and flies. Next, all the animals in Egypt died. Then clouds of dust covered the land, and the Egyptians were cursed with boils. Another time, great hailstones fell from the sky. After this, locusts devoured all the crops. God even plunged Egypt into darkness for 3 days and nights. Yet still the Pharaoh would not free the Hebrews. So Moses told his people to kill a lamb and to make a sign on their doors in its blood. He told them that they were not to leave their homes that night. Then God sent his last plague, an angel of death, to kill every firstborn child in Egypt. Only those homes with a sign of blood on their door were spared. Even the Pharaoh's own son was struck down by the angel. At last, the grieving Pharaoh agreed to let the Hebrews go. Moses led them into the desert. God sent a sign, a pillar of clouds which would lead them to the promised land. At night, the Hebrews followed a pillar of fire. It was not long before the Pharaoh ordered his armies to pursue them. The Almighty caused the Red Sea to part, and Moses led the Hebrews across. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, the waters came crashing down, and they were all drowned. A long, hard journey lay ahead of the Hebrews, but God did not forsake his people. He caused water to flow from the rocks, and little birds and bread to fall from the sky. Moses led his people onto Mount Sinai, but he climbed up the mountain alone. On the mountaintop, God spoke to Moses, giving him 10 commandments, which he was to teach his people. Their leader wrote down these commandments in stone. For many years, Moses led the Hebrews through the desert. But he grew old, and one day knew he could not go on. God granted him a vision. From the top of Mount Nebo, Moses saw the promised land far, far away, and he understood that the Hebrews could reach the land without him. So he lay down and died. He was buried by the grieving people whom he had saved from the wicked Pharaoh.